Today we want to continue our conversation with Brother Sababu Nplata, who is co-founder of African World Info Systems, a company geared to furthering the literary arm of the African conscious movement. He's Dr. Amos Wilson's business partner at African World Info Systems. He's credited with completing Black Power after Dr. Wilson's transition, and he publishes and edits the work of Dr. Amos Wilson. He's a publisher, editor, typographer. He, the last book that he's put out for Dr. Wilson now is The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat, The Reclamation of the African Mind, Reclaiming the African Mind. One thing I'd like to say again about this book is that we all must get a copy of this book and begin to read it. I know that you can get it two places. I know that our sister Aisha should have this book. I know for a fact that our brother iNation has this book. For those of you who have read Blueprint for Black Power, alongside the philosophies and opinions of Marcus Garvey, here is a book that you must have, you must get, and we must begin to read. It doesn't matter where we are in our African conscious thinking, in our African consciousness. The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat, Reclamation of the African Mind. So what we've been doing with Brother Sababu Nplata is taking this book chapter by chapter. We should have done chapter 1 last week, so we're going to do chapter 1 this week. And we're going to go to the phone lines. We've been talking about our brother Sababu Nplata and about our conversation on the psychology of self-hatred and self-defeat towards the reclamation of the African mind by Dr. Amos Wilson. It's edited by our brother Sababu Nplata. Brother Sababu, greetings, my brother. Thank you so much for your patience and for being back with us this morning.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for being invited back, and I hope all is well.
Well, we are hanging in there. We're still, it's a vigil, but we're hanging in. And I'll have a personal conversation with you shortly in terms of updating you with what's happening. But I want to thank you so much, Brother Sababu, for the work that you continue to do. And specifically, we're looking at the book, The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat, which you have published the works of Dr. Amos Wilson. I promised our listeners that I've reminded them that we're doing this chapter by chapter, but I've also promised them that we will do a quick recap, just looking at what a little bit on Dr. Amos Wilson and his other works. You have been a partner with Dr. Wilson for many years at African World Info Systems. Tell us a little bit about Dr. Amos Wilson, the eminent psychiatrist.
Yes, psychologist. Yes.
Psychologist, yes.
Yes, well, as you know, in the bio, Amos hails from the southern part of the United States, Mississippi, Hattiesburg, to be exact. And, of course, after a stint at Morehouse University, he ended up here in New York in the very early part of the 1960s. Of course, we know him to be a supervising probation officer. He worked in the Department of Justice over at the Bronx courthouse. Of course, at the same time, he was pursuing his studies at the New School and at Fordham University, where he trained in the areas of theoretical psychology, etc. And of course, by the time I met him, he had published his first work, The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child. So I met him in 1980. He had published The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child. in 1978, and that became the definitive work in the area, establishing the need for a black psychology different from the standard white middle-class psychology that we were normally given. So that's Amos in a nutshell.
Yes, yes. And of course, you know, one of his works that we all know and many of us use in the way we hold the philosophies and opinions of Marcus Garvey is a blueprint for Black Power, which you yourself edited and released. How important is that particular text, the blueprint for Black Power?
Could you just repeat that question again?
I'm saying, in your opinion, how significant is that text, the blueprint for Black Power?
Well, in a sense, it is the culmination of many of his lectures throughout the 1980s. And to hear Amos say it, in a sense, he had been leading up to that work, and it became more like a summation of all the thoughts and practices and ideas that he had been percolating over a period of time. Those of us who heard him speak on lectures such as European political dogmatism or European historiographies and even issues of self-hatred and other things, you can see that at some point he would be leading up to something as comprehensive as Blueprint. So definitely it was a crowning achievement, if I may say.
Yes, I do agree. You know, onto the text at hand, which we're doing chapter by chapter, and I thank you once again for being patient with us. You know, I'm starting with a quotation from Jacob Caruthers, because he says, although many of us are unaware of it, we are in the midst of a war, perhaps the greatest intellectual conflict of world history. This is a war to liberate our historical and cultural memory from the most vicious intellectual assault ever perpetrated on humankind. It is a war to free the African mind. That we agree with. What we have here in the psychology of self-hatred and self-defeat towards the reclamation of the African mind is exactly the blueprint, if I may, no pun intended, to help us to free the African mind. First of all, to understand what has happened to the African mind. And in this text, Dr. Wilson has laid out what self-hatred is, what self-defeat is, and how we can overcome that. I want to go there. The chapters that we're reading, they're called sessions, first of all. There's a reason for that, Brother Sababu.
Yes. The whole thing occurred over a 5-week period. So therefore, they became labeled sessions. And of course, afterwards, I would try to, for the publication, tease out the essential theme of each session and so forth. And of course, went on further to subhead each section as he got into various areas, and in addition to find the original sources of the material that he cited and put corroborating information with events that actually subsequently would have related to the text that he spoke about then, or that was really definitely pertinent. That piece that you cited by Dr. Caruthers, who I had the privilege to encounter in the early part of the 1980s at the First World lectures, you're really quoting from the top shelf of African thought right there. With Dr. Caruthers. And I think in what Amos is actually doing, I think on page 10, is where he really gets into it, where he says that I will look at self-hatred and self-defeat as being manifested or expressed as contempt for, a dislike of, and indifference to one's ethnic, familial, cultural, and personal background and or characteristics, such that one is moved to deny, destroy, or radically restructure those purported or real characteristics, or to erroneously or deceptively perceive oneself so as to be deemed acceptable to others and not be rejected by others. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, you see the essence of what is self-hatred entails.
Yes.
Right? Yes, the overarching need to be accepted by others.
Yes.
And you separate yourself from family and and community and everything.
And these are some very strong words. Contempt, self-hatred, being contempt for one's realistic and objective characteristics.
Yes, and of course, we have gone through the whole bleaching and all the variations of the bleaching over the years, and we see this playing out in, at one point with the Concoline. When I got here to the U.S., it was favorable that people slick their hair and do this and do that and all kinds of distortion. Mm-hmm. And we see the Afro, right, the representation of us in our naturalness and beauty, that came now to counteract some of these things. Right, so these are battles that have been going on. And of course, and the very symbol of the book where we represented the paper bag test, where even in black institutions, the black skin was put against the paper bag, and it was, if you were lighter than the paper bag, you got in. If you were darker than the paper bag, you were left out. So you see this type of self-contempt building itself in under this type of oppressive condition that the African is placed.
And he talks about... Yes, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I'm saying he talks about the objective and realistic characteristics, but he also talks about the contempt for the cultural characteristics in terms of self-hatred. So moving it from just the presentation of ourselves, but now to contempt for our cultural characteristics. I know we're speaking just from, and I've asked you to speak with the voice of Dr. Wilson this morning, but help us to understand what Dr. Wilson is saying when he talks about self-hatred being contempt for cultural characteristics.
Well, one of the things is that, let me give you a personal reference. You would hear, even in days gone by in Trinidad, you would hear of, they would be beating Baptists in the squares in Port of Spain and this type of a thing, right? Now, the spiritual Baptists at the time, they represented some some remnant of the African culture, and yet still were not the approved religions of the time. So you had the Roman Catholics, you had the Anglicans, and you had, and those others. And the fact that we were practicing the spiritual Baptist faith, or those who practice even the Shango, which would be the Orisha tradition, it was totally looked down upon. It was frowned upon, and these people were punished in a society that was basically Eurocentric in nature, and many a times the people who will be doing the beating would be our people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like the police and others would be the vanguard there executing the wishes of the colonial powers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And of course, and they look for, and in those days, you couldn't be what they called a thin-leg policeman. You had to have certain burliness and, you would measure your chest and your calves and your thighs and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted burly people who could enforce the law.
Mm-hmm.
So you would see this type of figure being used to beat in line our folks who wanted to practice anything different from, from the established religions of the day,
Mm-hmm.
and the piousness and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
The sometimes even in the churches, you had benches being marked off for the heads of the different churches.
Yes.
For the old families, this would be their pew, and those pews would stay empty in the churches, and you dare not sit in those places.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that family may not come to church for 2 or 3 weeks, but those pews stayed empty until they came.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, even being a part of these institutions, you were basically in the back.
Yes. Yes.
And you see this being cultivated, being instilled, being imposed on a people until almost it comes as if one day people call you dog long enough, and one day you will get up and try to bark.
Yes. Wow. Yeah.
Yes.
Because underlying all of these, we must keep referencing the inducement of self-hatred through. And so we're defining self-hatred. We don't want to leave that hanging by itself, because there's a reason why we got to this place. How did we get to this place of self-hatred? And you've kind of touched on that just now, Brother Sabab, when you talk about if someone calls your dog long enough, then you start to bark. So we're gonna right. So we want to go there, but interestingly enough, though, and this is so. It's one thing I like about how this text is presented is the language is really simple and easily understood, but also so profound that it touches you at many different levels. It is for me, it was aha in so many different places. Aha, yes, exactly. This is it. In terms of what is being said, but Dr. Wilson also says we're not just talking about attitudes now. When we talk about self-hatred, that is being the contempt for or dislike of or the indifference to our ethnic, familial, and cultural and personal background. But we're also talking about behavior.
Well, of course, and the key to this particular thing is that you set up the environment, and it produces a certain type of behavior. And they feed one off the other, and it goes back and forth. And, and this is what we see. You put people in a ghettoized situation, and then you wonder, why do you produce what you produce? So, or schooling, sometimes I look back at what we learned in the West Indian Readers, book 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and even those that went back into when you were in first stage, second stage, and third stage, right? Those are primers. And you ask yourself, did you see a representation of an African person there in those 8 books that affirmed anything for you? Right? And I have these West Indian Readers book, from the earliest up till book 5.
Yes.
And you look at the table of contents, and you saw nothing affirming of an African person. Nothing at all. So in a sense, it was not in the curricula.
Mm-hmm.
You see, now you're hoping that your teachers would have had some sense of at least putting some type of ambition in you to be something, right? That type of a thing. But in terms of the material that you were given in those EC schools, which were the English Catholic, or the RC schools, and these others, and these books were edited by J.O. Cottridge, right? Yeah. And my mother used these books, and even sometimes my grandmother used some of these books. You saw that the representation there was nothing affirming the African experience. You would read about Captain Benbow and this one and that one and Raleigh and all of these people, but you didn't see yourself there. You would even see stories on the cotton and the this and rice and all kinds of other things, but you would not see who was the one doing this cotton, who was the one doing this tobacco and this rice planting and all of this stuff and the sugar cane and whatever else it is there. We were non-people.
And you know, and even now, what we have some revisionist work going on with the text books. But what I find interesting is that they're revising them down now to, and I say down deliberately, down to being Jamaican, and I don't know if it's happening like with Trinidadian or Barbadian or so on, so that the Chinese is presented in these books as Chinese. It doesn't matter where they live; they're identified as Chinese, and the Indians are identified as Indians, regardless of where they live. But black people who present like us are identified as Jamaicans, and there is no mention of Africa in any of these books. And I think this is another part of the attitude of the behavior of that leads to self-hatred that Dr. Wilson is speaking to when he talked about it is an attempt by the individual to almost deliberately misperceive himself as to find himself accepted by others, or to relate to others in such a way that one's objective characteristics and self-evaluated characteristics are kept outside of his consciousness or his field of consciousness. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, and this is the danger with what I call half-baked knowledge, or folk who don't have the vision as to where they want their people to go. And if you're preparing a people for independence and for rulership, you first have to take control of the means of education, and not this ridiculousness that we see being presented. And you know what's interesting about that type of these types of works, right? This West Indian reader didn't only stay in the Caribbean. It went over on the African continent, and it also went east wherever these people went.
Yes.
So what they produced, in a sense, the intent was to produce a servile people. I remember in school days when other people got the royal reader, and we had to get the West Indian reader. You know, it was a step down from the royal reader. So they were, again, producing two types of people. Yes. One to rule, and the other to be servants of the ruled.
Right. Hold your thought for me, Brother Sababo. I'm going to take a quick break. I'll be right back. Inside of the Africa Forum, it is Running Africa, and we're inside of Black History Month, and our observations include a discussion of the text by Dr. Amos Wilson, edited by Brother Sababo in Plato, The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat Towards a Reclamation of African Mind. We think this is such an important text that we are not discussing this book in 1 week. We're going chapter by chapter. And Brother Sababo has really been very kind about this. He's consented to be our guest for each chapter as we go through. All right, Brother Sababo, thanks for staying with us. So then, we see there's an active process of self-hatred through education. And once again, we go back to the inducement, education or miseducation then, because we're now talking about the text. But Dr. Wilson talks about equal education, and equal in quotations there.
Yes. Well, of course, without these issues being addressed, in terms of the self-hatred and the other things and the deficits that are created, now you are freed up and put into the classroom, and you think then that you are getting an equal education. So you have a curriculum that is working against you. It is designed by the other people to produce a different type of child, and now you're trying to fit your child into that space. And in many cases, we would have done, in many cases, a good academic job. You know, they can pass the common entrance examination and all the different things that were part of the criteria of that day to go on to secondary school. And for those even older than myself who had to do senior Cambridge and other things. Mm-hmm. But really and truly, did you come out knowing anything much about yourself? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think this was the issue. It seems as if then that this education was to create a type of a civil servant and one in service of the ruling European group, as opposed to really putting ourselves in a place of power. Mm-hmm. And in my understanding, it seems like these independence movements, we had almost about by 1970, which would have been 8 years after independence, you see the upheavals going on in Trinidad and Tobago. And when you look at even Ghana getting independence in 1957, by 1966, Nkrumah was forced out, was chased out. Mm-hmm. So you would see then that, these early years, within the very first 10 years, this model that we were given really wasn't working. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that folks were calling for more. Mm-hmm. But our people who inherited these positions in the new government, they were not prepared, and they didn't even have their own people in place to really change the educational policies that these children would fall into, and of course, these economies were struggling economies. Mm-hmm. I remember, I think, when Grenada got independence, I think the British gave them about $500,000. Mm-hmm. So you see the things that after these lands are raped and raped over and over and over, mm-hmm. They almost give you independence with a flag. And of course, our examinations, don't forget, they went to be England to be corrected. Mm-hmm. You see? Mm-hmm. Yes. Right? We didn't have nothing like, I think what they call CXC and all of that stuff you see mm-hmm. today. Mm-hmm. All of these examinations were sent over to the so-called mother country, right? Mm-hmm. Right? The old colonial countries. And even the curriculum in secondary school and everything else, my first encounter with West Indian history, as they call it, or Caribbean history, was in Form 3. Mm-hmm. I was already, 14 years going on.
And even today, history is not compulsory. This is where many of our students in the Caribbean are coming into contact with Caribbean history, to some extent with African history, but most definitely with Caribbean history. And it's not, and then it's a choice. You choose between history and geo, or you choose between history and lit, or whatever it is that they're putting it up against nowadays. So that is still not compulsory. But Dr. Wilson talks about education into ignorance. Can we talk about that a little? Because he talked about the European domination of black people depending upon the continuing ignorance of black people, and that we must recognize that no institution designed by Europeans is designed to get us out of ignorance. Can we talk about that a bit?
Yes, and of course, miseducation, it actually limits your abilities to compete for the positions of power with these people. So one type of education is an education for service, and another one is an education for dominance. And in terms of the structure that we went through, we were not being educated, in a sense, to take control. And Amos is, in his text, he's dealing with this. In fact, even on page 18, he would say that you raise your children for a world, a future, for an idea or concept of what the world is going to be in the future. Good. And most of us, we were just happy to be there and not be engineered with the type of focus that we are going to literally take control. And remember, with the independence movement too, don't forget that a lot of the resources stayed in the hands of the other people. And you can go all along the East-West corridor and you would see all of these companies, West Indian Tobacco and Carib Brewery and the Fernandez Rum Companies and the this and the that and all up and down the place there, right? These businesses stayed in the hands of the controlling European interests, even Guinness Stout and all of this stuff there, right? All of these things stayed in the hands of these other people, and we ended up with a type of independence, to be of service. And you saw the education following that same path of being service, or being of service to the colonials and the post-colonial masters. And of course, we had blackheads, right, who were there to enforce that stuff. Again, this education into ignorance. With, in terms of my experience, it was in Form 3 where I first got wind of the Maroon Bay rebellions. That was the first time Caribbean history was introduced. So in the Form 1 and Form 2, right? So you're talking about from 811 to 12, 12 to 13, and that type of a thing there. It was Europe. It was British history that was being taught. And my interest in learning and understanding the histories was when in Form 3 we were introduced to West Indian history. And I was like, what? Caribbean history? The African presence in the Caribbean. And it was what? The Maroon Bay Rebellion.
Yes.
Good. And then we would get, maybe the next term, we did the Haitian Revolution. Right? So these two things, and of course, at a later point, you probably heard about the Berbice Rebellion. And this, if this had been given at an earlier point in time, it would have so much better defined where I was going to go. You see what I mean? Because remember now, when you got to third form, you only had that 1 year, and then you had to choose your subjects as to what you were going to study.
Right.
For Form 4 and Form 5. Right? And most of the times, you were only allowed maybe 5 or 6 subjects that you were going to choose. And they decided that, hey, listen, are you going to choose the arts or the sciences? So either physics, chemistry, biology, or this or that. And most of the times, they would put these sciences in terms of time periods in the school system in conflict with those dealing with history and these other subjects.
It remains so to this day. It remains so to this. Well, that will take us to self-defeat, because we looked closely at self-hatred. But here we have Dr. Wilson talking about the psychology, not just of self-hatred, but the psychology of self-hatred and self-defeat. And so let us talk about self-defeat and what Dr. Wilson has identified as self-defeat among African peoples.
Well, in the long term, you would see it reflected in the lack of control of your society. And you would see it imploding in the behavior of your people inside, and you would also see it in your people being externalized, right? Looking for some type of salvation in foreign lands and foreign credentials, etc., as opposed to seeing and developing a sense of self and a sense of your own culture as being germane and being something worthy of aspiring to, developing, and other things. So at one point, we had the Prime Minister's Best Village competition, where, you would have the cultural groups from different parts of the country doing dance and this and that and the other. And believe you me, that lifted the morale of the people, because then, so it got a chance for us to see Monk St. George, groups from Tobago, and a different group from Blanchisseuse, and another group from some other parts of the country, Maroon and other places, and they would all come, in terms of competition, bringing with them different African dances and carryovers into the center stage, into the sphere of culture. And then you get that sense of, you start feeling that improvement of self. Yeah. But in a sense, that was not on the school curricula for the most part. I remember when we, in school, formed the first steel band, right? We had maybe about 10 young men formed a panside in school. And that was almost unheard of. And we're talking about well into the 70s.
Yes.
And you would say, well, hey, this is the home of the pan, right? And yet still, half of these things were basically outlawed in many of the schools. You see, so this, and
so
when you don't have these things undergirding you, and you can walk and feel a sense of purpose and pride in the world, it takes from you that sense that, hey, we are here to what? We are here to take charge of our destiny and walk the world as a free, proud, and erect people. Taking on and redefining this world in our image and interest.
So then is Dr. Wilson, in fact, saying that self-defeat, in a way, well, of course, predicated on self-hatred, and that once there is self-hatred, then it follows that there is going to be self-defeat, because he talked about the behaving in such a way, despite our capabilities and faculties, that the abilities that we have, if they're not used to advance our own interests and to accomplish our own goals. He talks about this self-defeat occurring despite our individual resources, despite our capacities, despite our abilities, because of our self-perception. Is he then in fact arguing that as long as there's self-hatred, which we have looked at closely, then it follows that we find ourselves in this position of this defeatist position?
Well, yes, it becomes a kind of a ring and finger relationship. Right? One works and one flows with the other. I know some people use the expression Batty and Po, and it's the same type of a thing. Once you have one, the other one follows. And even the choices that you tend to make now, because of this misperception of self and of your people, automatically is going to follow that you're going to make the wrong choices, and choices that do not advance your people's interests. So definitely, it works in that way. Plus, too, the society would then reinforce negative behavior. That's another thing too, When Amos goes a little further on page 26, where he deals with self-hatred through the manipulating of reinforcements.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The things that you are acknowledged for are the things that create the self-hatred in you.
Yes.
Right? And we see that. We saw that in the in the way that the hair was worn. I know many people who almost got fired and still do in these United States, but just having the hair natural.
Yes.
They had to put it on the legislature just within the last year that wearing your hair natural as an African person, right, was not grounds for dismissal, because these people wanted you to have your teased up, pressed hair, your type and all of that.
And we saw a situation in Jamaica just recently where a young child was kicked out of school because she was wearing her hair naturally locked. Not only that, it went to the courts, and the courts found that the school was right to do so. And this takes us to the heart of what Dr. Wilson is talking about, isn't it? When he talks about self-hatred through manipulating reinforcements. I think you should read for us, if you can, a bit of that, Brother Sababu, where he says we just don't hate ourselves on page 26. It is so strikingly poignant, and especially for our own particular situation here in Jamaica.
Yes, if we were to jump to the second paragraph,
yes,
under that heading, he said there are various ways in which self-hatred is deliberately induced in us. For example, the association of innate personal/group characteristics with negative assignation. But if creating self-hatred through negation or through negating a person's innate characteristics is not enough, then one can create hateful characteristics in him. You see? And this is the kind of thing, right? In other words, through effective conditioning, you create the characteristics in others that you hate. And this is, what is done in these societies. This often happens in a relationship, for example, where you may help to make a person a thief and then hate him for being one.
And then we could push that a little further to our own particular situation on the island in Jamaica. And I know people are listening from all over the world, but let us go to Jamaica for now, because we have the highest crime rate in the region. In Latin America and the Caribbean, Jamaica has the highest crime rate with just 5 million people. Now, what's interesting about that is that Jamaica creates murderers and thieves and gunmen and criminals. And then, they say they hate these characteristics, but Jamaica actively creates murderers. This goes to the heart of what Dr. Wilson, the self-hatred through manipulating reinforcements.
Yes, and the other thing too, of course, you had in many cases too, you have criminality that is even created in the United States being sent back into the country, right? So in a sense, it becomes a re-imported product that's being sent back.
And also homegrown through politics and political tribalism and garrison communities.
Yes, and then it goes to the thing that, and you start to wonder, do these people in control have no idea as to how to bring these things or how to run a society or change a society or something? Because it must be that that they must have some concept that you have to give our people something different so that they're going to choose a different pathway.
But if we are to take Dr. Wilson's thesis, and this is why I keep saying this is a brilliant book, at its core, basically he's arguing this because these are the very same people who would have come through the same processes that we just talked about just now, the very same miseducation system, the very same religious systems, and would be perpetuating the self-hatred and the self-defeat. So it's a vicious cycle that we're caught up in. So until I think that we have stopped, and you talk about the lack of the want of history not being taught in schools, for example. We're not coming into contact with ourselves as African people anywhere, whether in church or in the classroom. So what does that do? And I think maybe we can find some of the answers in these conversations that we're having. But we have to get everyone at the table to have these conversations.
Yes. And, and one of the things that we are running up against is that back in the day, it took a long time for certain styles and other things to filter through to reach into the Caribbean. Now, these things are almost instantaneous.
Yes.
And in a sense, the problem is upon you in a matter of seconds. So, something that becomes copycat from some other place, it's on your people. There's no distillation process at all. And these are things, so you find people into faddish behavior, this and that. You never saw people, back home walking, with their pants below their bottoms and all of this type of stuff. We didn't even see it here. And all of a sudden, this stuff caught on right around the year 2000, and boom, you go different places and you see this kind of a thing. So we had certain variations of behavior, but now the thing has gone way left, way right, and it's gone totally crazy. And of course, and you add to that the different addictions that have been allowed to come through these sports, bringing cocaine and all of these drugs and everything else, and a lot of that stuff is enabled. And you start to wonder, do these governments even have answers to these problems? I think as we go along, it's a conversation that we must have, looking at that. And I think at some point, there's going to have to be some action on this, because, of course, the discussions are good. I hear a call now in Jamaica for values and attitudes, to return to the conversations on values and attitudes. There was a mistake to have dropped that in the first place. But these are some of the conversations we're going to have. I want to take a quick break, Brother Sababu, and then to come back to talk about the superficial changes and looking at the more things change, the association of our innate ethnic characteristic with negative assignations by dominant whites. And he talked about, Dr. Wilson, that is, Adam, the Bible, Adam, the mythological account, and so on, and the Hamitic curse, if you will. We'll take a quick break and come back.